Minister.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning, Minister.
This was an executive
Are we?
in common room.
Very well.
Green marker.
So, why you're doing that? So, Minister, it's good to see you here.
Thank you.
Taking a wee while, but it's good to see you here. An issue from the committee's point of view, energy and issues and the way wider issues around energy. I'm sure you're aware of the frustrations felt around energy and renewables, and those frustrations haven't just been confined to this committee or this assembly. It has been widely reflected back to us as public representatives, and I do know through to your department that frustration felt about how energy was being dealt with and how we went through maelstroms of a variety of what appeared to be the department chasing its tail and maybe put into a tailspin by other factors, including debt. And I do acknowledge that. However, it has been, I'm sure, reflected back to you as well that the connectivity and the flow of information to this committee and indeed to other stakeholders hasn't been entirely what it should be. So I would like that you address that too, please, in probably one of your last engagements. It will be your last engagement with this committee anyway. It's unfortunate that we have to address the negatives first, but they are out there. And I do know that from dealing with your officials that probably if we were to start back at base, it could have been done in a much better way. So, anyway, Minister, it is good to see you here at last, and I look forward to hearing from you. And there's been already a number of indications from members to ask you a number of questions around this and related issues. So the floors are yours.
Thank you, Chairman, for the invitation, and I'd also like to thank the committee. I've done it on several occasions when legislation has come before us. I've sought to attribute to the committee for the work that it undertook. As you know, you've mentioned some of the negatives. You haven't mentioned any of the positives. I'll seek to bring those through as well. But I'm glad to be here today to talk to you about renewable energy. There has been no shortage of comments or opinions, views, criticisms over the past number of months from a range of people on the subject. So I think, Chairman, it would be useful to start with the facts. For renewable electricity, the programme for government target was 20% by 2015. By January 2016, we had actually achieved 25%. So with a target of 20%, we've achieved 25%. Probably one of the first positives. On renewable heat, the programme for government target was 4% by 2015, and we have actually achieved an estimated 6% by 2015. And I think that's a very laudable achievement by our own renewable industry, and I want to pay tribute to the renewable industry for taking us ahead of target, in advance of where we should be in a programme for government, Chairman, that was agreed at the beginning. And the renewable industry, and I pay tribute to them and to the developers, and I pay tribute to the investors who have taken us positively in excess of the targets that we set. Because that has not only brought benefits through reduced carbon emissions, but it's also brought hundreds of millions of pounds of investment to Northern Ireland, and that's not to mention then the associated jobs. It's been achieved through two main schemes, the Northern Ireland Renewable Obligation and the Northern Ireland Renewable Heat Initiative. I want to say a bit more about both of those schemes. The committee will be familiar with both, but I want to take a few moments to set out what they have actually helped achieve. It's very easy, Chairman, to focus on the negative aspects in relation to closure. but it would also be foolish because it's not the whole story. The Narrow was established in 2005, and I think we should focus on the success of the Narrow. It was integrated with the existing renewable obligation for England and Wales and the Scottish renewables obligation. At that time, renewable electricity was being generated mainly by a relatively small number of wind farms and individual turbines, and they contributed approximately 3% of total electricity consumption. Now, that's changed significantly over the last decade. There are now almost 17,000 generating stations accredited under the Narrow, with a total installed capacity of 840 megawatts. We now have almost 800 onshore wind generating stations accredited under the Narrow. Remember, there were 23 back in 2005. In 2005, there were 5 solar PV generating stations accredited under the Narrow. Now there's almost 16,000 stations, which have a combined generation capacity of 89 megawatts, the equivalent of 2 large wind farms. Anaerobic digestion is another technology which has witnessed real growth and is benefiting the local rural economy. There was only one AD station accredited when we brought in the higher rock levels in 2011. Now there are 32, with more in the development pipeline, nearly all of which are farm-based. And the Narrow has allowed us to address the poultry litter issue with Bombardier and Montupet, both companies that I've been with recently, both looking to utilise the biogas that's created from the anaerobic digestion of the poultry litter to fuel combined heat and power generation. Now, all of this has been achievable because we've had a great deal from the Narrow. I must pay tribute to whichever of my predecessors managed to negotiate a lower renewables obligation for Northern Ireland suppliers compared with their GB counterparts. And that achievement should not be underestimated. That lower obligation level and the socialisation of costs across all UK consumers has been instrumental in minimising the cost to the Northern Ireland consumer, whilst allowing deployment to grow at a rate that simply would not have been possible otherwise. Now, we turn to the closure of the Narrow. That linkage with Great Britain, which has allowed us to enjoy these benefits, also has implications when Whitehall moves to make changes at a UK-wide level. I'm not going to go back over everything which has happened since June of last year. All I will say is that throughout, I've tried to achieve an outcome which balances the costs to the consumer against the aspirations of the renewable industry. I brought in legislation last autumn which closes the Narrow to non-wind technologies in 2017. That allowed important projects, including the full circle generation facility at Bombardier, to reach financial close. The decisions to close early to onshore wind was not taken lightly and not without resistance to Whitehall. Personally, I struggle to see the advantage of the Secretary of State's early closure of the renewables obligation. But I cannot ignore the consequences of failing to make changes which mean we follow broadly equivalent policies to GB. This protects our favourable position on funding brought about by the socialisation of the Narrow costs. The situation is that closure must now happen if we are to protect sunk investment. The legislation I will be bringing to the Assembly later today will confirm closure of the Narrow to large-scale wind, and in doing so, it will provide the legislative clarity, the legislative certainty that these projects have been calling for. Now, turning to small scale, this committee has taken evidence from many on the matter. I too have been listening to the sector. Later today, I'll be meeting a delegation from the small scale wind industry. I have committed to further consultation on narrow closure to small scale. I must be clear, closure is inevitable. But where we can make adjustments which are in keeping with the position in GB, I will look to do so. I hope to publish a consultation later this month, and it'll be for my successor to decide the way forward. On grid issues, of course, the level of success in building significant levels of renewable generation in such a short period of time, it has presented problems, and not least in terms of the impact on the grid. I know this is an issue which this committee has examined in the past. The basic problem is that there is no answer to the saturation of the grid that does not come along without a hefty price tag. There's just no answer to the saturation of the grid and changing that doesn't come along without a hefty price tag. I know there's frustration. That's felt by me. It's felt by those who want to connect but cannot due to the lack and the cost or the lack of grid capacity. I know this frustration is increased by the imminent closure of the Narrow. I've met with numerous delegations on the matter. The committee will appreciate that I have no legislative powers to intervene on grid issues, and that is only right. Grid matters are the responsibility of NIE networks and the system operator. That's for the utility regulator to determine the appropriateness of their actions. Now, can I turn to renewable heat? The Executive's target is to achieve 10% renewable heat by 2020 against a 2010 baseline of 1.7%. This will contribute to the UK's target of 15% renewable energy by 2020, as is required by the EU Renewables Directive. There has been huge success of the RHI, and despite the closure of both the domestic and the non-domestic schemes to new applications on the 29th of February, the renewable heat incentive has been a success. Over 4,700 renewable heating schemes have been installed under the two RHI schemes since 2012. With over 6% of Northern Ireland's heating needs now provided through renewable heating technologies, we have exceeded the Executive's target that was set for us of 4%. This percentage is likely to increase once all applications have been processed, so we're well on way to attaining the Executive-endorsed target of 10% renewable heat by 2020 that was set out in the Strategic Energy Framework. We do need to look at RHI funding. Both RHI schemes are paid out of annual managed expenditure, which is in addition to Northern Ireland block grant funding. Normally, it would not have an impact on the NI Departmental Expenditure Limit, or the DEL block funding. However, even though renewable heating capacity through the NI-RHI equates to over 6% of total capacity in the GB scheme, the Chancellor's autumn statement confirmed that an AMI cap for Northern Ireland would be set at the Barnett share of circa 3%. This means that the block DEL will have to meet any funding that's in excess of this. Current forecasts suggest that over £30 million will have to be found in 2016-2017, and that's over and above the £18 million AMI allocation from Her Majesty's Treasury. Over the next 5 years, as much as £125 million will have to be funded from the NI-DEL to meet RHI commitments. And that is on top of the £130 million of AMI that will be provided by the Treasury. In the circumstances, I therefore had no choice but to propose immediate closure of the scheme to minimise further costs and impact on the Northern Ireland block. Over the last 18 months, the number of non-domestic RHI applications has grown from around 200 to over 2,100. Over 900 of these applications were received in the run-up to the scheme change I introduced on the 18th of November 2015. A further 318 applications were received in February prior to closure. All these recipients will receive RHI payments for the next 20 years. In addition to achieving the Executive's target, the RHI brings many other benefits in terms of jobs, in terms of the investment, and in terms of environmental protection. Ensuring a more competitive and diverse heating market in Northern Ireland remains an important goal. We need to reduce our current reliance on fossil fuels. Heat from indigenous and renewable sources must therefore be promoted. However, despite my support for RHI, we can't manage an executive budget on the basis of individual schemes taking off or incurring costs that were formerly funded from the UK without agreement. The Executive has many other priorities demanding funding which would have been put at increased risk if the RHI had not been closed. I do want to make the point, however, that some of the reaction to the closure of the RHI implies that money has been squandered or investment has been lost. That is not the case. The RHI has seen over £50 million brought into Northern Ireland over the last 4 years, and that's gone to help support some of the most important local industries, to boost and bolster the rural economy, and to provide what all of us want, much-needed jobs. Existing scheme participants will continue to receive support for 20 years. A further £130 million will be provided by Treasury towards these costs over the next 5 years. Although some jobs may be lost from within the energy services sector as the number of new installations reduces with RHI closure, the 4,700 renewable heating installations now in place will still need regular maintenance, and in the case of biomass, they will require high-quality fuel. That will help to sustain jobs in this sector. Now, looking towards the future of RHI, going forward in RHI, there has been an allegation that there has been abuse of the scheme in some cases, and we are following that up. There will also be a review of the scheme's design and management, as well as work with Ofgem, which administers the non-domestic scheme across the UK, to ensure that it is operating in compliance with the legislation. On the longer-term future of renewable heat, I am open to suggestions on how we might engage with developers and installers and others to see what is possible. This might involve consulting on the long-term position, assessing particular issues arising from scheme closure, looking at developments in other jurisdictions, or considering a redesigned scheme. It's important that we do take time to see what is affordable going forward, as renewables can deliver significant benefits. Environmental benefits from renewables including a reduction in CO2 emissions, major cause of climate change, and also air quality improvements which are associated with health benefits. Spending on renewables also brings employment benefits. A study by the Northern Ireland Renewables Industry Group estimated that in December 2014, a total of 532 jobs were associated with the onshore wind sector in Northern Ireland. A study for the department last year found that achieving the 40% target level will provide a net benefit of £120 million to the Northern Ireland economy across the lifetime of the renewable energy generation. So the positive result is achieved because of the preferential terms under the narrow scheme compared to customers in GB. Northern Ireland has not been paying the full cost of our renewable electricity support because, as I mentioned earlier, the supplier obligation, that part of our bills which pays for ROCs, is set at a much lower level in Northern Ireland compared to GB. So this reduced obligation level will continue to apply across the lifetime of the generating plant installed under the narrow, but no preferential treatment will be available after the RO scheme is closed. Now, all of this costs money, and it costs a lot of money. The narrow scheme for renewable electricity is paid for by the consumers, and it costs about £40 million a year. But we've reached the limits of affordability. We've gone beyond them in RHI, and schemes must close to new applications at least for the time being. Naturally, people who wanted to take advantage of these schemes are disappointed. They don't want the schemes to close. There will always be people on the edge, and they'll be very disappointed. But to remind the committee again, we have exceeded our targets. 25% renewable electricity, 6% renewable heat. The programme for government target of 20% renewable electricity consumption for our renewable sources has been exceeded by a quarter. The RHI target of 4% has been exceeded by a half. And of course, support will continue for up to 20 years for both RHI and for narrow. That's not all we're doing. I'm pleased to be able to tell you about an important energy efficiency pipeline programme that we have in the pipeline for the near future. The promotion of energy efficiency makes sense. Energy efficiency helps consumers, it helps householders and businesses to reduce energy usage. That in turn helps lower bills and also assists greatly with helping to reduce fuel poverty across Northern Ireland. Energy efficiency also underpins security of supply issues. An energy supply system that is built upon the efficient use of energy as a prerequisite will influence future levels of the generation that is required. Reduced demand helps to make the most of the resources that we have. And let's not forget the environmental benefits of reduced carbon emissions, as well as a healthier and a less polluted environment. My officials are working alongside colleagues in OFM, DFM, in DSD, and the utility regulator to develop proposals for the Energy Wise scheme. This is a cross-cutting programme. It has its origins in OFM, DFM's Delivering Social Change programme, and it continues to benefit from support and input from across the executive. Energy Wise will provide financial support by way of grants and loans for energy-efficient retrofit measures such as insulation and boiler upgrades. The key objectives of the scheme are going to be to deliver annual energy savings for Northern Ireland under the Energy Efficiency Directive, to improve the energy efficiency of buildings, to lower carbon emissions from buildings, to help mitigate against the effects of fuel poverty in the domestic sector, and to stimulate the local economy by encouraging investment in energy efficiency measures, creating jobs, and providing formal apprenticeships. I'm hopeful that I'll be able to provide further details in the coming weeks via consultation on the scheme and funding mechanisms that are subject to appropriate approvals. And let me turn to another important element of energy policy which can help develop a more sustainable future: the Integrated Single Electricity Market, or ISIM. The electricity markets across Europe are undergoing major reform to comply with the Commission's ambition of a single wholesale market with harmonised arrangements for the trading of electricity. The programme for ensuring our existing market, the single electricity market, is compliant, is led by regulators in Northern Ireland and Ireland, working under a governance framework developed by DETI and the Department for Communications, Energy and Natural Resources in Dublin. New arrangements can further enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of our market by making use of all the power that's on the system, by using interconnectors in the most efficient way, by sending out the right signals to investors that are planning to enter or to leave the market, and by rewarding the plant that best addresses our needs in terms of cost, security of supply and environmental obligations. We're on target to deliver new market arrangements by the end of 2017. But we can only expect to get the best outcome with further interconnection on the island. And that means the second north-south interconnector. Interconnection is a key element of European energy policy. Europe recognises the north-south interconnector is a key infrastructure project that supports its energy agenda, and it has designated the interconnector as a project of common interest, critical to achievement of its energy policy ambitions of a single wholesale electricity market. That designation obliges us to facilitate its delivery to the extent possible. Interconnection is essential to allow flows of electricity across markets to enable to access to electricity from the cheapest source. Without the second interconnector, we cannot hope to get the benefits of being part of the bigger European market, nor will we get all of the benefits from our work to redesign our existing market. The message we have all heard is very clear, and it's that the North-South interconnector should be the highest ranking infrastructure project for the next Assembly mandate. It will contribute to future security of our energy supply and lower costs for consumers by removing the constraints in the system that mean that we have to dispatch less efficient generation to meet our needs. Put simply, by increasing cross-border capacity to transfer energy, we will facilitate higher levels of renewable generation in our energy mix. Put another way, we are currently wasting electricity that we are generating at lowest cost from renewable sources. And that causes me considerable concern, because why would we continue to connect increasing levels of renewables when we cannot get the value of the investment? The more renewables we bring on without appropriate investment in our transmission links, the more we waste and the higher the cost to consumers.
Is there a limit on the Minister's time to speak?
Well, I was just going to bring him to that. I know you're due to leave here at 12:30, so I mean, I appreciate you haven't been with us in some time and you have a lot to tell us, but I do want to leave an opportunity for members to ask some questions.
I'm happy there. It's up to yourselves. Do you want me to speak on the new technologies, the gas extension, the gas to the west, the gas to East Down? If you don't want me to speak on them, I'll not speak on them. It's up to yourselves.
Can I open it up for questions, and if we get through the questions in sufficient manner, maybe we'll probably have time to come back
Chairman,
at the end.
if possible for the Minister, would you be happy, Minister, just even to forward that?
I can forward it if we stay.
Appreciate it.
I mean, the committee had asked me to prepare this information for it. I'm trying to service what you've asked me to do.
We understand, but we also understand that you've given us an hour, and you know, if their presentation takes 45 minutes, that doesn't leave an awful lot of time to have some discussion around it. So it would be helpful.
I would set it for 30 minutes, but maybe I speak too slowly.
Well, it's for 35 minutes now, and you still have 3 or 4 pages left. Could I just then ask members to be brief with their questions to try and get through this, and also to those responding to try and be succinct as well, to try and get through this too. I'll just ask a couple of questions to open up. You give figures for the next 5 years in terms of the Renewable Heat Initiative commitment, and you said that lasts for 20 years. Is it a similar figure per year for the next 20 years in the region of £25 million?
Well, it differs obviously according to what come on within each year.
Right, and is there any guesstimate at the variation of that? Are we talking vastly reduced, or perhaps even vastly increased?
I can forward the committee the details. I'm not going to guess in front of a committee what each of the years are, but I'll certainly forward you those details.
But there will be a 20-year commitment for this Assembly?
Yeah, the 20-year commitment is from they come on stream.
Was our scheme more generous than perhaps schemes were in England, Scotland or Wales?
Well, we looked at
Are
the
they left with the same, I mean, if they face the same reduction in terms of their Barnett levels, are they left with the same overcommitment that we have for the next 20 years?
Well, I've only responsibility for the Northern Ireland renewable heat incentive. I found myself in a position where the Chancellor changed the arrangements for how they were to be paid. It didn't afford me the opportunity to do a compare and contrast with the other parts of the United Kingdom. It was a Barnett consequential of 3%, which was instructed, and then everything else would have to come out from our budget. I can only act to what the instructions are to Northern Ireland.
I appreciate that perhaps you haven't done the comparison, but it would be very useful for the committee in the next mandate to have such a comparison, whether it's done by our own research or not, because I accept fully the decision in this, and the decision in the Narrow was prompted by very abrupt decisions taken in Whitehall, which left the department here in a difficult position. What I'm keen to establish is whether the department's management of the scheme throughout the course of its lifetime, with all of the benefits that you've explained, left it in a more vulnerable position in terms of the executive's funding than perhaps has been the case in Scotland or Wales.
Scotland and Wales are covered by, it's a GB scheme and a Northern Ireland scheme. There's no separate scheme or funding, therefore they don't have a budgetary issue because the budget covers GB. That's the way DEC and Ofgem manage that for the rest of the UK as a single unit. So that there's no issue of comparison with Scotland and Wales. It's different degrees of devolution is how that applies.
Okay.
And I think Chris and I covered this the last time we were here in relation to the way it evolved, and there were steps taken to change the scheme in GB, which we did, as a matter of fact, were not taken in relation to the Northern Ireland scheme, and that is a contributory factor in this whole issue.
I mean, you can do a compare and contrast, but the reality is that the Chancellor has imposed this in Northern Ireland. We have devolved responsibility for it, and while it might be a useful academic exercise, the reality is costs that were being spread. A new arrangement was made by the Chancellor that then meant that the difference above that 3% Barnett consequential was going to have to be found from the Northern Ireland budget. Those are the realities that I had to deal in.
Well, I'll not delay this any longer. It's not necessarily an academic exercise, because if the management of the scheme has exposed the executive here to a greater financial commitment going forward than needed to be the case, then those lessons need to be learned, because we're going to get back to other schemes, and the lessons from that need to be learned. Can I go on to
yeah, I accept that.
Yeah, can I go on to the issue of the Narrow and the closure? I think what is required is certainty in relation to this, and there's three levels of certainty. One, for the large scale, that what the steps that you're proposing to take and put into the Assembly today will have the desired effect in terms of DEC and ensure that the commitments that they have gone into are honoured in relation to that. The small scale do require a genuine consultation. I'm told at the moment, if people go onto the website, they're referred back to the previous consultation, and that has created a mood, and I'm glad that you're meeting small scale representatives today. That's created a mood of perhaps the departments go through the motions of a similar consultation they did in the past, and I think there needs to be certainty for small scale that this is a genuine consultation that is going to look at some of the issues that they're raising. And thirdly, I think for the renewables industry generally, given the experience of both schemes, they need some certainty going forward into the future that the department are going to look, accept the targets have been exceeded now, but that won't last forever, and clearly we will have to come back to new targets will be set under a new programme for government. The renewables industry is a very key part of our industry here, and has to be certain as the future. And I think also issues like the connectivity to the grid, the decision by NIE and Sony to close down grid connections, that all adds to the uncertainty, and I think in any future certainty that we're giving the industry, those types of issues need to be addressed, as well as schemes which can be brought forward which are sustainable and affordable for the executive going forward. So if you could give us some words on those. And
let me be as brief as I can. In terms of large scale, you've seen what I'm proposing to do and to carry through later today. That should give you the certainty that's required there. In terms of small scale, let me be clear, this will be a genuine consultation with the sector, and as part of that genuine consultation, we'll listen very carefully to what the sector is saying to us. But I've always got to balance the issue of affordability and the delivering for all of Northern Ireland, not just individuals. I have to take a bigger picture approach, and I think the public expect me to. So I've announced that we are going towards closure of the small scale. I have informed members and interested parties that what is being proposed by DEC, and the chairman, sort of in his opening remarks, didn't point out the 4 different changes, at least 4 different changes that DEC took that we responded. And personally, I think we should always change when the facts change to deliver the best outcome for Northern Ireland. And when DEC changed its position, we looked at every stage how we could change ours to deliver best value, to act in the paramount interest of everybody in Northern Ireland. So we'll go forward with a genuine consultation with the sector, conscious of the fact that DEC have taken a position that what comes out of that in terms of renewables that are not part of the scheme would not be tradable on the market. And that potentially then delivers considerable uncertainty to the whole of the NI ROCs, and we must be very cognizant of that going forward.
Okay. Could I, just before I bring some of the members in, just apologies from the chair. He was called away on a family emergency situation.
Sorry to hear that.
Martin and William.
Minister, thank you for coming in. Just one particular issue, because I know other members want to come in. The 2 great problems facing the renewables sector was the closure of Narrow for large scale, now done, and we're into a consultation for small scale. But the other issue is the moratorium placed by NIE and Sony. And that puts everybody in a queue. They've gone out to consultation, but it'll be some time before that is resolved. There's a particular issue around some businesses who are vital to our economy, who are trying to create their own renewable sources, and in particular the Dale Farm. And many of us saw David Dobbin of Dale Farm on TV last year. You were talking about the difficulty getting energy west of the Ban. But the Dale Farm plant in Cookstown and Dunmanbridge has a plan for a solar park which will provide it with much cheaper energy. And my question is, Minister, there are another couple of businesses, and I think including DuPont, but I think they may have had to move on. But is there any way, as Minister, that you can intervene with the NIE on this moratorium to speed up or to facilitate or enable this project to go forward? Because this is a project which is directly linked to job creation and the success of one of our biggest producers of dairy products. I don't know if you're aware of that particular issue, Minister, or you've been briefed on it, but it seems to me there is a need for an intervention in this moratorium as well.
Well, let me take the 2 of those particular points. The first one was in terms of energy and what we have to the west, and I have had obviously a number of discussions with David Dobbin, representing Dale Farm, but he's also acting as chairman of our Manufacturing and Energy Advisory Group. I have been keeping him informed of what we're doing with the licences awarded by the regulator to Mutual Energy, SGN, and that should bring natural gas to towns in the west. That includes Dungannon, Coal Island, Cookstown, Macrofelt, Omagh, Strabane, Enniskillen and Derry Lynn. Pipeline works to connect Strabane to gas has started in November 2015. First gas connections expected later this year, and works to install new gas pipelines between the remaining towns will go forward in 2017, subject to necessary planning and approval. And the overall project should connect around 40,000 consumers in the west to gas over the development period, and that's being supported by the Northern Ireland Executive with a grant of £32.5 million. A number of people have raised with me the issue of the grid and I have no powers to intervene.
Well, just to finish, Chair, I mean, we're all kicked out of here tomorrow anyway, but I think it would be useful, Minister, if the Guard is not having any power, you've a certain amount of influence, and I know when David Dobbin was on previously, Dale Farmer was talking about the interconnector and the importance of that, but I would ask you perhaps to use that influence to see if we can have some type of flexibility within the NIE moratorium, because I think, you know, our electricity prices are dearer here than they are in Europe, but for business, according to PwC, they're 48% higher. And if we can help Dale Farm get cheaper energy going into the future, and it's their own investment, I think it would be very useful. So I would ask ministers for your...
No, well, let me take up that baton. It's something I try to use the influence that we have constructively as we possibly can. Obviously, there's a consultation in process, and we'll bear the influence directly in the import of what you have just described there.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay, sorry about that, Minister. I had to go out there, very urgent domestic situation, but...
Wearing's okay.
Well, I hope so, anyway. So, Mr Dunn, Gordon.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, and officials for coming in. And I know a lot of members have been keen to get you here, so you're very welcome.
Thank you.
And in relation to the wind farms that will materialise as a result of what is done later on today, all being well, what is the financial significance of that in relation to the potential investment in the Northern Ireland economy?
Sorry, I just hear that question again. What is the financial implications of small scale?
The large scale wind farm stuff.
Well, what we're doing is providing certainty to the large-scale sector. I think that should be in the region of financially £900 million, and I hope that certainty that's provided, and also the future genuine consultation with the small-scale sector, will seek to provide as much certainty and clarity as we possibly can. Although I want to be clear with small-scale, closure is inevitable. But we'll try to make adjustments which are in keeping with the position in GB, and I'll look to do so.
Okay. In relation to small scale, I think we're all very sympathetic to the position that they've found themselves in, especially farmers and potential developers and so on. What were the financial implications for the consumer? Could you remind us briefly what those financial implications would have been to the domestic consumer and to the business?
Yeah.
Consumer, especially manufacturing.
Well, there were a number of implications that were there during each of the different iterations of what the Department of Energy and Climate Change's policy is. In the interest of brevity, I'll not go through each of the at least 4 different positions that were adopted and the different costs that would have come with those. But the current implications that we are consulting with small scale now on closure is around the fact that the Department of Energy and Climate Change have been clear that anything outside of their system will not be tradable. And that's a very stark warning that has been given to us by the Department of Energy and Climate Change. And I think it's important for all of us to set out the facts for the industry of what the circumstances are, and to assess into the future what the implications would be, not just if those that are outside the system weren't tradable, but also the difficulty if that which is tradable also is caught up in the mix where people have to decide what is tradable and what is non-tradable. And that could be a significant dilemma, and it's a warning I want to put out there. If, when you go outside the system, if we choose to do that, following the consultation, those rocks will not be tradable. And the impact that has, in my initial consultations, would be very detrimental.
Okay, in relation to the surplus rocks, we have a significant surplus of rocks being generated at the moment. Not the case, Minister?
Yeah, I mean, we're ahead of target, and there are obviously great issues I've set out in my statement earlier where my concerns actually arise there, and how we could possibly deal with some of that. Yes, but there are circumstances where we are generating renewables that we are not able to put onto the system.
And at the moment they're marketed in the UK.
Yeah, at the moment, all of our rocks are marketable there, but we've been given a warning by DEC, which is saying that if we go outside of their system, those rocks that are outside of the system would not be marketable. And then you have to then try, as we're trying to assess at the minute, to make some level of value judgment on what that is, because while they're marketable, we're exporting 60% of our renewable obligations outside the geographical area of Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Just on that, Minister, back to the small scale, and the issue has been explored from the cut-off of the Nairo, which obviously is you're intending to do for large scale. The issue has been raised with us around grace periods, that there be a similar duration of grace period from the point of cut-off for allowable for small scale. In other words, the cut-off for large scale is going to be whatever date you choose as a result of this next week, and that would run, including those grace periods and including those investment issues, for a period of time. Is it the intention, or would it be the thinking within the department that you run that grace period for a similar period from cut-off or the Nairo for small scale?
Well, at the moment, we're obviously going to go to consultation. Chris, you can speak more definitively on that particular matter, but we're looking to see what specifically can be done, and as we take forward a genuine consultation with small scale. Chris, do you want to look specifically at the issue that has been raised?
Yes, Minister, Chair, we've had very useful discussions with small-scale representatives in recent weeks, and they've put that very point to us that you have outlined there. They recognise that DEC is immovable on the closure date and the eligibility criteria. What they're looking for is an equitable playing field in terms of how they're treated vis-à-vis large-scale in relation to what is now a very complex set of arrangements for grace period criteria. One that I think they've drawn members' particular attention to is around what's known as the investment freeze criterion. Those are issues that we want to cover in the consultation. We certainly want to set out options in terms of what might be done. As the Minister has said, we need to be mindful of, on the one hand, what we might offer to the small-scale sector in terms of what they're looking for, but also balancing that against the decision that DEC will take in terms of what that means. To put it simply, we want to go as far as we can to meet the concerns and the aspirations of small scale, but without triggering unnecessarily the penalty clause, if I may describe it in that way, that DEC might apply to us.
You might have missed the point I made earlier, and for fully understandable reasons, but I did make the point earlier, and I want to be very clear to small scale that closure is inevitable. But where there are adjustments which are in keeping with the position in GB, I'll look to do so.
Okay. Then the other aspect of where the idea that somebody had dreamed up of just a Northern Ireland rock, this standalone rock, which some people had said its value in terms of tradability on the, say, the London markets or elsewhere. It was described in here by one of the key stakeholders as it could subsume to the stage of just being determined to be a funny rock of little or no value. So is that a serious consideration by your department?
Well, the consideration that was given is a consideration to the policy, as you know, of the Department of Energy and Climate Change. They have informed us. And it's important in all of this debate to realise that the Department of Energy and Climate Change changed their position a number of times. And they then informed us, and they also have a backstop in the legislation, as they say, to protect the GB consumer. So it's not the policy of my department or any of myself or anybody dreaming something up. It's a policy of us trying to forensically and judiciously respond to what has come to us from the Department of Energy and Climate Change.
I don't think it was DEC's idea.
And they have said to us, well, I think if you should read the legislation, they have said to us that in the legislation with their backstop power, that the Northern Ireland rock that would be separate would not be tradable on the market. That's not an idea that I have taken forward. That is a response to what DEC has put into the legislation.
What I'm trying to ask, if you listen to the question, that was, is it seriously being considered by the department?
What I've said was the consideration that we're given is we are now going out to consultation. So we have to consider everything that arises from the DEC legislation.
Oh, okay.
It would be foolish to take legislation which has a specific backstop power to Northern Ireland and not to consider it. But we should also, as I was doing earlier on in some of the parts, was outlining that there is a significant danger of those rocks, were we to go down that route, and we're out to a genuine consultation. I'm not going to prejudge that consultation. I'm certainly not going to determine what a future minister may do in respect of it. But what I am going to put is an advice out there that we need to be very serious about the impact that this could have on all of Northern Ireland's rocks.
Okay. I realise that you have some time constraints. It might be helpful, maybe, if members, could we take all the questions, and then if an individual question from each member, and then the Minister could make a stab at answering them collectively. Okay, so I have, in this order, Mr McElveen, Mr Agnew, Mr Murphy and Mr McKinney. So, David, could we have a quick question from yourself?
I have done my questions, Chair. So
pardon?
I did my question.
Well, you did it earlier.
I used my position in the Chair in your absence.
That's okay.
No questions.
So, can we have quick questions in that order, please?
Yes,
First yourself, David.
Mr Chairman, thank you, and I'll try and make it as quick as I can. It's effectively one question, Minister, but there is three sort of short strands to it. You touched on the interconnector, the north-south interconnector, and that obviously is something that has been on the agenda for quite some time. I wonder, can I ask you, number one, for an update on where we are at the moment? Number two, just to remind the committee of the savings that would be realised as a result of the interconnector being up and running, and finally what you would see as the way forward in the next mandate for ensuring that this does become a reality.
Okay, Mr Agnew then.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Just very briefly, Minister, I'd like to say I'm slightly disappointed in the comment that we've reached the limits of affordability in relation to renewables. That's a political choice, in my opinion, rather than an inevitability. You mentioned the targets achieved. 2 targets achieved. We have 2 targets yet to be achieved: 40% renewable electricity by 2020 and 10% renewable heat by 2020. So really, in relation to those targets, I'd like to ask, is the department still committed to those targets? And if so, what options are being considered for future support for renewable energy in Northern Ireland?
And Mr McKinney.
Thank you, Minister. 2 points. One is, how would you characterise how the committee has been treated in relation to all of these matters? And 2, isn't the consultation not really a consultation but a Hobson's choice for many in small wind, given the constraints around planning, the rocks change proposal and grid connection problems?
Okay.
Well, in terms of the interconnector, I've said before, I simply regard failure as not an option on it. I've outlined extensively in the statement I made, and apologies if I laboured that statement too much at the start, but I wanted to make that particular point on the interconnector, that failure is not an option. The current update is that it is in the planning systems, north and south, and we await to see what comes from there. The savings that were mentioned are in the region of €20 million. In terms of targets, what I've been very clear is the targets that I was to achieve by this period have not only been met, but have been vastly exceeded. We look towards the targets of 2020, and we're working towards those targets. But I think the member has to take cognizance of the fact that there is a question of affordability, and that in circumstances where previously costs that were borne across the United Kingdom, that a decision by the Chancellor of the Exchequer to change how those payments are made and to put onto Northern Ireland anything above the 3% consequential. You have to be reasonable and you've got to be responsible. There is major pressures on hospitals, on schools, on roads. There is much more that I would like to do in my own department if I could get a budget to actually take things forward. But there is an impact on the budget, and it is, as everything is, that we have devolved responsibility for a political choice. But the reality is the targets that were set under my watch have not only been met, but they've been vastly exceeded. And in connection to Mr McKinney's point, what I have sought to do at every time where I can is get relevant information to the committee. But as you know, Chair, we've been on the phone many times, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that. But it is not a decision that I just take on my own. I've got to respond to a changing position from the Department of Energy and Climate Change. I have a responsibility to the people of Northern Ireland to act in their overall best interests. And when positions change and significant costs are attached to those changing positions, I regard it as my role as Minister at every time to try to get you the information, to try to get the committee the information when positions change, and also to try to get into legislation in the House the best possible outcome for Northern Ireland. I do appreciate the situation that small scale is in. I couldn't not do that, given the impact both within my own area that it has and in other members' areas as well. But I think the decision has got to be taken when you've not only reached your target of where you're at, but you've actually gone beyond your target, where both in narrow and RHI there has been considerable successes, and where DEC has moved to a position where they are now saying, with their backstop power, this could have significant impact on Northern Ireland and significant impact on Northern Ireland rocks, then I do think we should go to a genuine consultation, but I've approached that in the way that I've laid out.
I think picking up on that point, Minister, you may not be aware of it, but what we were hearing here was third-hand, the development of policy from other key stakeholders. Essentially what we had was the small developers coming in here to relay to us policy discussions which had been had elsewhere with large-scale developers, and I think it was not only an embarrassing but an unsatisfactory situation that we were hearing from others how policy was being developed, and then well, lastminute.com, we have the policy landed with it.
Well, I think you need to examine, was that how policy was being developed? I don't know exactly all of the details. What I've sought to do with both the large scale and the small scale is to develop proposals in terms of legislation and consultation that are in keeping with a changing position, very much a movable target that DEC set over the period that I've been in office. I don't need to go through that. That is all on the record, the changing positions. And within the changing positions, it has led to a lot of concern, discussion, some information, some serious confusion around the information that has been there. We have sought at every stage to provide clarity, and what we're doing today is to provide the certainty for large scale. And I don't think it's wrong in the circumstances to listen very carefully to what the small-scale sector is telling us, to advise them of what we're going to do by means of consultation. I think that's the fairest way forward, both for them, but also for delivering in the paramount interests of everyone in Northern Ireland.
Okay, Minister, I reckon that's us for today. Anyway, we've kept it fairly well constrained to the time, so thank you for the time, and again, my apologies for having to duck out to deal with that situation.
I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
So. Members, just one final item of business that we have to deal with here is that that's the SR itself. Now, obviously, we had division last week on the SL, so I don't anticipate that members will have changed their views radically one way or another, but I have to put the question, are members content with the SR that the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment has considered SR 2016, the Renewable Obligation Closure Order, Northern Ireland 2016, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, recommends that it be approved by the Assembly? Well, clearly, I personally, and I know we weren't content with that, so we can put it to a vote today again if members wish to register their disapproval or otherwise, or suppose that's the best thing to do.
Can we just record a vote then, Chair, on the proposal that we're content with it? I'm happy to vote for that if that's the proposal being put.
Right, so those who are in favour, please show, and those who aren't, please show. You're abstaining, are you?
Abstaining, Chair, yes.
Coming on.
Aye. So, anyway, so that concludes all our business for today. So thanks very much, everybody, for your time, and again, my appreciation to you all for the cooperation that there has been over this last while in my period as chair, and I wish you all the best and good luck on the campaign. Okay.
As one of the members who served along with Mr Dunn the full length of the committee, I'd like to thank you, Chair, and your predecessor, Alban McGuinness, and indeed the committee staff. They've been excellent throughout.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Stephen. So all the best, everybody, and hopefully see you again.
Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland